Hello, and welcome to this special Texas Public Policy Foundation virtual panel discussion. My name is Andrew Brown, and I have the privilege of serving as a distinguished senior fellow of child and family policy here at the foundation. This Sunday, November 8th, Christian churches all around the world will be observing Orphan Sunday and Stand Sunday. These two observances are designed to inspire awareness and action in support of children without parents globally and those in the foster care system here at home. We are pleased to join this movement and hope our discussion today will inspire you and provide practical ways that you can serve some of our most vulnerable children and families. According to UNICEF, there are nearly 140 million children worldwide who are classified as orphans, meaning they have lost one or both parents. Now, while the majority of these children are living with a surviving parent, a grandparent, or another relative, significant numbers are in need of a permanent family. In the United States, more than 400,000 children are currently in the foster care system. On average, approximately 56,000 children each year have their legal relationship with their parents severed through a process known as termination of parental rights. Here in Texas, there were more than 51,000 children in the foster care system during 2019, and an average of 5,800 children experience termination of parental rights each year. Children who are removed into foster care endure traumatic experiences that can lead to a variety of long-term negative outcomes. Foster care alumni experience disproportionate rates of poverty, homelessness, substance abuse, poor educational performance, and a variety of physical and mental health issues. One study even found that children who spent time in foster care experienced PTSD rates roughly equivalent to that of US war veterans. From the very beginning, caring for orphaned and vulnerable children has been a priority for the church, and the church continues to this day to be a powerful force for promoting adoption and the well-being of children around the world. And today I'm honored to dive into the way that the churches around the world can and are able to join in and come around children in need. Our panelists today are actively living the biblical calling from James 1:27 to care for orphans and widows. Bishop Aaron Blake is the pastor of Greater Faith Community Church in Brownwood, Texas. He and his wife Mary are the founders of Harvest Family Life Ministry, which exists to equip and train the church on how to meet the needs of children from prevention to permanency. In 2004, he delivered a sermon that launched Stand Sunday. He is a tireless advocate for children who are in foster care, and he's chaired the advisory committee on promoting adoption of minority children. He's received numerous awards for his work inspiring communities to take action for children in foster care. Bishop Blake and his wife are the proud parents of 6 biological children and 6 engrafted children. Tanya and Jay Folkrod are the founders of Family Restoration Coalition, a ministry that works with churches to support the families of children in foster care. Based in Austin, Texas, their flagship program, 3 Strands, provides support to parents who have either lost custody of their children or are at risk of losing custody of their children through parenting classes, mentorship, and practical support. Tanya and Jay have 4 daughters of their own and have also served as foster parents twice. Thank you all for being with us today.
Glad to be with you.
Bishop Blake, I'd like to start with you. Stand Sunday began with a sermon that you gave back in 2004. Tell us the story about how this movement began.
Well, the Stand Sunday as we know it today was very different when the actual idea or emotion that came over us the day of. And what it has actually led up to that was the fact that I had gone to children's court. I had gone to the court in our county where it happens every week, where judges, CASA workers, caseworkers, and families go and their cases are heard there in the courts. Well, that particular day that I went, it was a day when my son that was in the foster care system, rights was going to be terminated. And I didn't understand that process. I went to court. A caseworker stood up and made a few statements, and the CASA worker made a few statements, and the attorney made some statements and handed the paper to a judge. The judge signed it, handed it back to the caseworker, and the caseworker got her things and was out the door. I scurried out the door behind her to catch her and said, "What just happened?" And she said the rights of my son had been terminated. Parental rights were gone, and no longer did the parents have a legal authority as parents. And I said, "You mean my son is without a parent?" And they said, "Technically, yes." And I said, "Who's going to come tell him?" They came and told my son. And that day, our hearts, Mary and my wife and our hearts were just pierced, just to think that rights of a parent signed away their rights because of circumstances in the life of that parent. And that Sunday morning, which this happened on a Friday, I went to studied all day for a sermon that I was going to preach that Sunday. But I stood up in front of our church thinking of our boys that had just left the breakfast table. And I said to the congregation, "We got to stand up for these kids in Texas." At that time, there was over 28,000 that was in the foster care system. And I said, "Who would stand with me?" And I didn't literally mean stand up, but one lady stood up about midway of the church and said, "I'll stand." And then another one, and then another, and another. And 6 months later, we had licensed families in our church, and 38 kids came into our church from the foster system. And so that's how Stand Sunday happened in a little church of less than 150 people in a little town, less than 20,000 people in Central Texas called Brownwood, Texas.
And now the movement is nationwide. What impact have you seen with the growth of Stand Sunday?
Well, the growth of Stand Sunday, we were surprisingly blessed and fortunate to get a call from Christian Alliance for Orphans, and they said that Orphan Sunday is considered, or sometimes considered by Child Protective Services and others, for orphans, and we didn't have anything that represented the side of foster care, and could they use our story? And we said, "Why, sure." So they used our story, and it started out, and in the years to follow, it spread it throughout the U.S. And last year, we got so excited because we saw a video on YouTube from the Philippines of a church in Philippines that was doing Stand Sunday. And so it has just spread it across the country and around the world that people and churches are standing up for orphans and standing up for kids that are in the foster system.
That's amazing. What a powerful story of influence. Tanya and Jay, I'd like to switch over to you and talk about your ministry, Family Restoration Coalition. When I learned about your program, it really resonated with me because you all are taking a different angle toward what I would consider the typical approach to how churches and other volunteer organizations get involved with the foster care system. Family Restoration Coalition seeks to leverage the church to restore families whose children are in foster care at risk of being removed into foster care. Tell us a little bit about how you got started with that angle and the impact that you've seen from your work.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, would love to. And thank you for having us. In 2013, Tanya and I took our first foster placement, and we fostered again several years later. And what I would say about the children that we fostered is not only did we fall in love with those children, but each time we also got to know and fall in love with their parents. And it was in that process of getting to know the whole family that God kind of planted a desire in our heart to somehow do something to strategically help families be restored, be reunited. And so that God kind of put that in our heart through the process of fostering. It took a few years for that seed to kind of come to a point of fruition. And in 2016, we met with some local judges and caseworkers and got approval to start offering some classes and mentoring services through our local church, and not just with our local church, but with some partner churches that would be credited towards that parent's court-ordered case of or course of services that they would need to complete in order to get restoration of their custody and their parental rights. So we used a curriculum that we had learned about through some connections we had in the foster community. And we did this on a volunteer basis. Really, a lot of it's still on a volunteer basis now for 4 or so years. In 2019, we formed FRC, Family Restoration Coalition. We wrote a new curriculum called 3 Strands, and we've been in operation now for about 12 to 18 months, continuing to offer these parenting classes, mentoring services, and form connections and support systems through churches for these families who are in crisis. In terms of impact and results, over the 4+ years we've been doing this, I would say we've worked with around 100 parents. Of the cases that we've been able to work with, and of where we can trace the outcomes on those cases, we're seeing that about 64% of the parents that we've worked with have been reunited with their children. Just by way of comparison, in Travis County, where we live, the average is closer to around 37%, and I believe nationally, that average family restoration rate is somewhere closer to 49 or 50%. So we're seeing a better success rate with what we're doing than we're seeing, against some of the benchmarks that we can compare against. I would also say that this includes some pretty dramatic cases of turnaround in some of the cases that we worked with, families who might have been headed towards a termination of rights who made a turn and were able to be completely restored. Some cases also where maybe in working with us that the parents came to realize they weren't quite ready to really parent, and rather than it being a contentious, drawn out legal battle, decided of their own volition that it was time for them to surrender their rights. So we also consider that a successful outcome where a parent realizes that they're not ready, and rather than fighting it legally, greases the wheels with the system to move that child on to a home that can better care for them. We've run around 10 classes. We've drawn on a volunteer base of probably 200+ people from 15 to 20 churches here in the Austin area, who contribute anywhere from 1,000 to 1,500 volunteer hours for every class that we run. And those are some numbers, but what I would kind of describe qualitatively in terms of the impact that we're making is that we see with each class that we run that there's inevitably sweet community formed among the parents and among the volunteers and the churches who are doing this program. The parents who come through find a tribe with each other and with their volunteer teachers and with the mentors who they're working with, and they don't want the class to end at the end of the 9 weeks. In our classes, we have a lot of hard and honest conversation about what it means to be a parent, our own personal backgrounds and struggles and how that impacts the task of parenting. We provide a layman's overview of some concepts around trauma and the brain and attachment parenting. And in all, we work through some practical parenting exercises, and in all of this, we also contextualize it deeply with the scriptures and with the gospel. We're tying it all back to the overarching glory of the big story of the fact that we're created beautiful in God's image, yet we're fallen, and in God and in dependence on Him and with His people, there's hope for grace and restoration. One more data bit I'll just kind of say about that, and I'll kind of yield the floor, is that, the parents that come through our program, if you work in the business world and you're familiar with sales and marketing, there's a score or a metric called the Net Promoter Score, or NPS. And our parents who we survey coming out of this program consistently give us an 86 NPS score. So there's a lot of enthusiasm among the parents who come through for this work that's happening, that they're realizing with the support of churches who want to help them.
Tanya, I want to follow up on one thing that Jay brought up, was this idea of community and personal connection that exists between the parents who are being served and the volunteers who are serving. Can you talk about what it is about that personal connection, that community that forms, that is so powerful for helping people turn their lives around?
That's a great question. I think some of the most important things that happen between the families and the church is that they find people they can trust. That's the first thing. They find people that are advocating for them and are willing to advocate for them and fight for them. And I think the most important thing out of those reasons is very few people see the potential they have to parent their children well. And in these communities, in these relationships, these families are beginning to believe for the first time that they have great potential to be great parents. And no one has believed in them. No one has stood on the sidelines cheering them on, reminding them of their strengths, and just the most important thing is that they were created to be parenting their children. That's God's design, is that we parent the children he gave us. But I think having trusting relationships for the first time, people that see the beauty in them that God created, and the potential to be great parents, and then people in their life that will fight for them, and that will go to the nth degree to get them the resources they need, or to help reconcile a broken situation, or set up meetings to work through miscommunications that have happened between attorneys and caseworkers and all of those things. So just an advocate, someone fighting for them, someone standing for them and saying, I believe in you, and I'm going to do whatever I can to help this restoration happen on this side of heaven. So
that's wonderful. And before we get into the meat of our conversation, I want to address a topic that's perennially the elephant in the room. And the COVID-19 pandemic is at the forefront of everyone's mind, and it seems to have impacted nearly every American in some way or another. But particularly impacted, but often overlooked in the analysis of the government's response to the pandemic, are children in foster care and their families. How has the pandemic affected your work and the lives of the families that you serve? And Bishop Blake, we'll start with you.
Well, we know that there's nobody on the planet that has not been affected in some way or another by COVID. And but what we have seen and what we do, because we engage churches and then equip those churches to then be empowered to care for. So when the churches shut down, first of all, then we found that the path of the direction that we were going was one problem. We also receive and work directly with caseworkers. We also work on the prevention side up front, working with school districts. And then when there was no school, and then the caseworkers could not get out to see kids, and then family visitations were then put on stall because of COVID. We knew then that there were some things that was probably going on and happening that made our children at risk, even more at risk. What happened in our lives, in every American's life, in everybody's life, concerning COVID, slowed everything down and stopped everything and put everything on pause, and also brought some unexpected situations. It even tripled, doubled, and even more times those families that were already in crisis, already in poverty, already seeing problems. And so we had to create another path to get to the communities. And so we started working in communities where there were food insecurities. And we started working with the school district and working with others that were carrying food to neighborhoods and to apartment complexes. And we went to Child Protective Services and said, can we just bring a drop-off, have a drop-off area for families to just come get food, so we can kind of have a eyeball look, a relational connection with those families and with those children. And we discovered, because of that we had to do our extent of care in a different way. In the next months going ahead, those of us that are in this ministry of in between, we're going to have to do things differently. We're going to have to do things that are out of the norm, in order for families and children to be safe, to be healthy, to receive what they need. And so it became a challenge, but it also became an opportunity. And I'm just excited for this new way that we're doing it, because it creates another opportunity for us to serve.
It's wonderful. Jay and Tanya, how has it affected your ministry and the families that you serve?
So we had a class running in February when everything shut down. And so we put a pause on that class and resumed that class in June, and were able to graduate more than 2/3 of the class. So we were super excited about that. So while it slowed things down, it didn't stop what we were doing and what the Lord is doing in our families. So we were able to have a graduation in June from that spring class. And then fast forward to September, our fall class got started, and we are currently finishing up our fall class right now in Round Rock. And while the class is a little different because of all the COVID regulations and things we have to do to protect families and volunteers, it has been a great class, and parents are being served. I would say the only thing that has really, COVID has really changed about our class, besides just slowing it down, is our mentors and our parents are not meeting as often. And so while some mentors and volunteers need to take precautions for themselves and for their families, it just doesn't allow for COVID and all the things that come with it, just don't allow for those relationships to meet in person as often. So that's been a big downside for us, because that's what sets us apart from any other parenting class that families that's what sets our class apart from other parenting classes that are available to families, is that mentoring relationship. And so we, like Pastor Blake was saying, we have really been forced to kind of think out of the box and figure out how to be creative with the mentor and parent relationship. And so it's kind of, it's really started our, juices, rolling as far as going forward. And in the spring, we've got more churches jumping in to offer classes. And so what is that mentor and parent relationship going to look like in this season of COVID? Another really sweet thing that's happened is we have a local restaurant here in Austin that was doing some special things for families in crisis. And so they were giving us, Family Restoration Coalition, meals almost every week to give to our families that were struggling. And so that was a huge blessing to be able to deliver yummy meals from this local restaurant. And we also were able to, thanks to a donor, we were able to give lots of HEB gift cards throughout this COVID season, really kind of in the, spring, early summer. And because most of our families are servers, they work in the kitchen, they're hostesses, they are with they're in those businesses that have been completely shut down. And so the Lord was able to use us to, provide, and our donor to provide all of these HEB gift cards and meals. And so, so it was really sweet to see how God was still providing and using us, even as things were slowing down as far as classes go.
It's amazing to see the adaptability of the community and ministries and other voluntary organizations to respond to, and it's been said over and over again, but really an unprecedented challenge. And I'm impressed by both your organizations and how well you've adapted to meet the needs of those who are struggling and those who are going to continue to struggle as this thing drags on. I want to shift gears a little bit now, and speaking personally for myself as a Christian who's been in the child welfare field for just a little over a decade now, I've personally had the opportunity to see how powerful the church can be in what we broadly refer to as orphan care ministry. And research shows that practicing Christians are more than twice as likely to adopt and about 50% more likely to foster than the general population. With that said, anecdotally, it seems to me that a lot of the energy tends to be focused or taken up on the adoption side of the equation, and that is not to downplay the adoption side of the equation at all. It's a critically important piece. But it seems like more energy and interest could be directed to the foster care side of the equation, and specifically the family strengthening side. Do you believe that there is more that the church can and should be doing when it comes to foster care outreach and helping keep families together?
I personally would say absolutely. And to your point, it is a good and right thing that the church is invested in providing a plan B for children who are in hard places. That's definitely keeping in God's commands in Scripture. But we need to remember that plan B is not plan A. Plan A is plan A. And if the situation with a biological family can be made to work, it needs to be attempted. It needs to be made to work if it can. I like to say that the best form of orphan care is to help a child never be an orphan in the first place. So we believe this work of family restoration for that family in crisis, it's very strategic kingdom work. It is the gospel through and through. It is close to the heart of God. And our hope and prayer would be to see a surge of interest and investment into this particular area of need within the foster care world, that is supporting the biological family. And that interest and investment would be commensurate to the strategic importance of that work, its importance in God's economy, not to mention our own social structure and even economics of our world, our country, our state, and our local communities.
Bishop Blake, in addition to Stand Sunday, you also work directly with pastors to motivate them to get involved with foster care through a program called Clergy in Court. Tell us a little bit about that program.
Well, that program, and as I mentioned earlier, when I went to court for my son that had rights terminated, I had never been in children's court before, and I didn't even know it existed in my county, and I had pastored at that time for 12, 15 years, and yet didn't know that in my county every week children and families that were in crisis and were at risk of losing their rights, and also kids aging out of care without reunification, happened every week in my county. And so when I went there and I heard what happened, case after case after case, I was just floored. My emotions was running crazy because I wanted to just jump up and say, hey, give me every one of these parents. I want to love on them. I want to get these kids back in these homes. And I wanted to interrupt the judge and interrupt the caseworker and the cost worker and say, hey, I'm here. I volunteer. So when I left court, besides taking care of what I needed to take care of for my son, I wanted every pastor that I knew to experience what I experienced. So I began to call the pastors in our ministerial alliance group, and one by one, I said, if you go to court with me, just sit there for 1 hour, and then I'll buy you lunch, and everyone that went would come out and say, what's going to happen to the kid? What's going to happen to the parent? And I would say to them, no one in that courtroom really knows. The only one that could have an idea is you and I, pastor, in our churches. And he said, how can we know? I said, because we already have the invitation by God to care for the orphans and the widows, to care for not only the children, but the mamas that those kids come from. And I said, we got the invitation, we got the playbook, we have the manual, we have the people, and why don't we have a plan? And I would ask the pastors, do you have greeters? I said, yeah, we have greeters. Do you have a janitor? Yes, I got a janitor. Are they mandated in scripture? Well, is the other mandated in scripture? Yes. Well, let's get busy, pastor. So clergy in court is not something that pastors do. It's something that pastors get stirred to do. They don't go into court to do something in the area of the courts. They get stirred to go back to their churches and then create or start or just do what God said do.
Well, what a powerful program and a great way to activate the church. And most of the people that I speak with who are active in either adoption or foster care in some way have at least one eye-opening experience like what you're facilitating through Clergy in Court. For me, it was while I was in law school. The school that I attended had a child advocacy clinic that allowed students to gain experience handling real-life cases under the supervision of a licensed attorney. In my first case, I represented siblings who had been in the foster care system for a little more than a year. And when trial date came, I was standing right next to their mother and recommended that the judge terminate her rights so that those children could be free for adoption. And as soon as those words came out of my mouth, that mom broke down sobbing in the middle of court. And while I still believe that this was the correct decision in that specific case, that moment really had a profound impact on me. It opened my eyes to a lot of the myths that I'd been believing. It opened my eyes to the impact of our court system outside of the academic exercises that I had been engaged in learning the law. What I really learned was that mother loved her kids,
Yes.
but she wasn't able to fix the problems that were placing them at imminent risk of harm. She wasn't a monster. She just didn't have a community to turn to for the support that she needed. And in many ways, I think the system failed both her and her children. Tanya and Jay, I'm sure you've had many eye-opening moments of your own and would love to hear about one or two that really stand out to y'all.
So, Andrew, in 2013, we started our fostering journey, and the Lord brought a precious 7.5-month-old little girl to our front door. And we were super excited, and our girls were excited, and the Lord had entrusted us with this little human. And honestly, we were kind of clueless, but we were so excited that we had this privilege to care for this little girl. And in the beginning of her stay with us, we quickly found out that mom was in rehab and that she had really struggled with addiction for many years and was homeless at one point, really didn't have any biological family to care for this little girl. And then there was this extra special little thing that the judge had granted this biological mom, and that is what we call doctor visit rights. So basically, mom had been given rights to come to all of baby's doctor's visits. So you know, unbeknownst to me, I'm like, okay, this is great. You know, I'm going to meet mom, and she's going to learn about, you know, what's going on with her baby, and, you know, just completely kind of ignorant as to how this whole process works. And so I show up to the first doctor's visit, and mom gets dropped off by the rehab and unattended. And I'm in the waiting room, you know, with my 3,000 bags of baby stuff and trying to figure out paperwork for baby. And mom walks in, and I will say my biological mom was just had a huge presence. She was twice my size. She was much taller. She was, again, like I said, dropped off by the rehab, unattended, no supervision, was still working through her addiction. And she comes up to me and really didn't recognize her baby, but I had put the baby down on the chair next to me as I was trying to gather bags and paperwork. And she just swoops baby up off the chair and says, "This is my baby." And, you know, I'm kind of in la la land and trying to figure out how to do this whole foster mom role and at the doctor's visits. And then there's this strange woman picking up this baby that I'm supposed to be protecting. And so our first encounter was just really awkward and uncomfortable, and it was kind of scary. And so fast forward a few minutes, we get into the little tiny doctor's room, the room where the doctor comes and we have a visit or whatever. And mom is super boisterous and loud, and she's super intimidating and not happy, and just immediately thinks that I'm trying to steal her baby. And it was not a good first impression, and it was really hard for me. And I actually, after it was all said and done, I had to scoot out of the doctor's visit and go out through the back door, because the doctor, it wasn't safe for the baby and I to be there with mom. And so it was just really, really hard, lots of tears for me, and fear. And so that was my first encounter with mom. And so fast forward, we had some conversations about, okay, with the team, with the attorney and caseworkers and all of those folks, you know, if we were going to have these visitation rights at all these doctors' visits, it needed to happen a little differently. And I needed to be able to trust mom, and mom needed to be able to trust me. And so she was able to kind of pull herself together, and we met again. I gave her another chance to come to another doctor's visit, and it was really sweet to see how just the fact that I gave her that chance to do that again and to do it over really just kind of changed her heart towards me and mine towards her. So we met again at the next doctor's visit, and it was really in that doctor's appointment where I saw her for who she is, and she is this little girl's mom. And so it was so completely different from the first doctor's visit we had together to the second. And by the end of the second doctor's visit together, I had a chance to pray for her. We were able to comfort her little girl together. She knew that I was there for her and for her child, and that I had no intentions of stealing her baby and adding to my family, but I was there to just be a place to care for her baby until she got better. And that quickly evolved into a beautiful relationship with her. And she began to spend time with our family while her daughter was in our home. We went to church together. We did life together. We went to the park together. We had meals together. At one point, towards the end of the placement, we celebrated her baptism together. We threw her a Christmas shower so that she would have what she needed for her baby's return, as Christmas was coming very shortly after the return. Um, we just did life together, and so we saw as a family that this mom, this family, even her extended family, grandma, that they needed support and they needed resources. And even more than this baby that was in our home, this family, this biological family, needed us even more. And so that was really our first introduction to the need that's out there for families who are in crisis, that are in hard places, that have come from hard places. And so that was kind of our first introduction to this world of biological families and their need for support.
One of the really interesting things that I hear you all saying as you tell these stories, and it's consistent with other stories that I've heard, is these eye-opening moments really shatter a lot of the preconceived expectations, whether it's what the system's like or what the families are like. So I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the myths and realities surrounding foster care, and particularly the families of the children who enter the system. For example, the vast majority of children who are in foster care have not been physically or sexually abused. Roughly 75% of victims of child maltreatment in Texas are victims of neglect only when you dig into the statistics. And neglect is something that's often correlated with poverty. So I'd like to spend a few minutes just discussing some of these other myths and realities that you all have come to learn over the many years that you've spent serving. And this is open for the panel to discuss.
So I will start by just saying that one of the biggest myths is that the kids do not love their parents and that the parents do not love their kids. That is far from the truth. I have witnessed firsthand, up close and personal, that these kids absolutely adore their parents and vice versa. They are just really struggling and are living very much in the moment and trying to figure out how they're going to eat lunch and eat dinner and where they're going to sleep. But in their heart of hearts, they adore their families, their children, and they are fighters. And so that is one myth and misconception. And Jay, feel free to jump in. I think the other huge misconception is that there's just no hope for them, that they just can't do this, and that we foster parents would do such a better job. And I will tell you again firsthand, while I'm super thankful for foster families, we have been foster families twice, but biological families are the best. Biological parents are the best parents for their children. And there's no replacement of a biological mom and a biological dad. There's no replacement.
I think I'd just kind of add that, if you're of the mind that it's better to remove a child, let's make sure that you're not operating in a vacuum of the consequences on the other side of that equation. Because anytime a child is removed from the home, that's a serious inflicting of trauma on that child. And so, a lot of the players in the system, the judges, the caseworkers, the advocates, a lot of times they don't have the luxury of making good decisions, right? They're really trying to navigate and figure out what's the least bad decision to make in any particular case. And that's not always clear. Those cases can be very complex. Sometimes there's something, almost all the time, there's something going on in the home that isn't good. But is it bad enough to remove the child with everything that's going to mean for the child over the course of their life? And so that leads to decisions sometimes that you hope you're making the right decision, but you're not always sure. Some cases are obvious, but most, as you allude to, aren't, because the reason for removal isn't necessarily the hardest core cases of abuse or neglect. Often it's, some sort of neglect issue often due to substance abuse or other issues. So those who administer the system, they need our prayer and support. They need wisdom to navigate these cases to a just outcome. And that's why if you ever sit in a family court case, there's a lot of parties in the courtroom. There's not just the judge, there's not just the caseworker, there's multiple attorneys representing all the parties inside. There's advocates, there's therapists, there's coaches, all providing input into what's the best outcome in this case. And hopefully the best decision is made. And all that being said, sometimes still mistakes will be made, and we need to expect that. And in all of this, there's the possibility for redemption in all these situations. So,
Bishop Blake, I'd like to focus on one issue specifically. This is the issue of disproportionality in foster care. Some of the most recent data show that African Americans account for roughly 12% of the population in Texas, but African American children comprise 21% of our foster care population. What's driving this, and how can the church respond?
Well, that's been one of the areas that has really pushed our ministry to do and to go into places where our kids come from. I jokingly say that I don't necessarily qualify because I know the answer. The only qualifier I may have is that I've been Black a long time. And when we talk about disproportionality, we also recognize that most of our kids that are in the system come from poverty. And we do know that there's a high percentage of African American families that live in poverty. We also know that there is a high percentage of arrest and incarcerations that lead to fathers and families being separated, and that leads back to poverty. So there's several systemic things that underline there. But there's also a historical distrust for systems and child welfare in the African American community that also makes it more difficult for reunification to happen, and all the other factors. So African American children go into the system faster, they stay in the system longer, and their outcomes when they age out are worse, percentage-wise. Our ministry understands that. And so when we go into communities and we target communities of poverty, and we target communities of color, and we target communities of where there's disproportionality, is because we want to, first of all, is engage and empower the faith community to then rise up and then wrap around those families, both in prevention and then intervention and then transition. We want to wrap around those three areas so that we can go upstream when we can. And then we can go midstream in foster care. And then when it has to be adoption, catch those kids before they go over the waterfall in the sense of aging out of care. And then if they age out of care, we still want to have a wraparound support system for those, because we created something prior to them leaving care to be able to do it. And let me say this one last thing, is that there's always been a foster care system in communities of color, whether it's Black or brown communities. They've always had some underlying creative care where Auntie, Uncle, Pookie, them, somebody stepped up to care for kids in those communities, because there was a historical distrust, and it didn't have the relationship with systems. And but I also think that systems don't understand, and then even bridge ministries and nonprofits don't understand how to go in and empower. And there's a difference between going in and say, I got the answer, and another going in to empower those who really have the answer. They just don't have the resources. So we hope and pray that agencies like, my friends here that's on it, I told them we're going to team up and we're going to go in communities together. And the matter of fact, we're going to get on the happy bus and we're going to go into those communities and see how we can redeem something that's already there. The power to redeem is already there. We just want to empower those who have the power.
That's incredible and a very good word for us to hear today, especially. As we're nearing the end of our time together, there's a few exciting opportunities that are coming up in the next year from a public policy perspective that really open the doors for churches and community organizations to become more active in some of the issues that we've been discussing today. The first is the way that the federal government funds state child welfare systems is changing next year. In October of 2021, states will, for the first time, be allowed to use money that they receive from the federal government to administer their child welfare systems for front-end prevention efforts, for services and programs targeted at keeping kids with their biological families rather than entering into the system. Up until this period of time in our history, that money could only have been used for maintaining children in foster care, which created an unintended yet perverse incentive to remove children in foster care. Now the culture is changing. We're recognizing that prevention is a critically important step. Another major change that's happening here in Texas right now is a transition away from a government-run, government-centric child welfare system to one that is based in the communities where these children and families actually live. This new decentralized model, known as community-based care, is operating currently in 4 regions of Texas, and it gives local private charities, nonprofit organizations, churches greater responsibility for caring for and managing the cases of children who enter the foster care system. Essentially, it gives local communities a greater say in caring for their most vulnerable families. And what we know going into this next legislative session that starts in January, the department is looking to launch community-based care in 4 more regions of the state. And organizations all around the state are working together to get ready for the launch in their region. So I want to encourage churches in regions that have not yet launched to start getting involved with the planning process. Get to the table, volunteer your resources and strengths to getting your region ready. In regions where community-based care is already active, and these are areas surrounding Fort Worth, San Antonio, Abilene, and Lubbock, churches should connect with the local lead agency to see how they can help and how they can fit into that puzzle. And we'll be sending a follow-up email from this webinar with some resources on how churches can get more involved, and we'll make sure to include some information about connecting with these lead community-based care agencies. And also, please feel free to contact us at the Texas Public Policy Foundation if your church is interested in serving, and we can help put you in touch with organizations and resources that can help you along that path. So before we wrap up with this move toward increasing the involvement of the church, I would love to hear from our panel on the advice that you would give either to individuals or to churches on how they can stand up for kids in foster care and their families.
Well, what we do, one of the tools that we do, we found that is very effective, and that's a tool, technology platform that we use called Care Portal. Care Portal can be used by churches, by businesses, by individuals. So far, we're in 254 counties. There is 1,213 active churches that are involved with us right now. And basically a request comes from a caseworker right into your inbox on your phone. You can take your phone and right to your phone can come a request from a caseworker. And then you or you're in representing your church or representing your business, you can just click on that and say, yes, I can take care of that need and be actively involved. The other thing is, both our ministries that you have here on the panel, within the areas that we serve, we'd love to come to your church and and work along beside your church and a group of churches to then engage ways in which you can, everybody's not called to foster and adopt, but I believe everybody is called to care. And there are multiple ways in which to do that. And we love to help in any way that we can, or work alongside others that are doing it to mobilize the church.
I would say we are always hungry for volunteers with three strands, whether it's people who are willing to potentially teach a class, serve as a mentor to a parent in crisis, to help administer childcare or serve a meal, because we serve meals on our class nights, help provide transportation. We'd love to have, there's an on-ramp for people willing to serve at many different levels of personal investment. And for churches to be involved, hosting the class, providing facilities. We welcome churches to come and serve on one night or observe, all the way to jumping in and kind of being a host church for a class and really taking this on as a strategic ministry within their church. And I guess my advice or my guidance would be is if this might be stirring in someone's heart, is to just jump in, do it. This is a messy ministry, but go ahead and jump into the mess and start navigating. And it will be hard, but it'll be a huge blessing. We learn in this by doing, not by thinking about it or wondering about it, but by stepping in and doing. And you and your church would likely discover gospel muscles you didn't realize you had. You will find that you will call out and activate gifts in your people that you didn't realize were there, and that would otherwise be latent and unrealized. You ultimately not only minister to your community, but even to the state, the players in the system, and you will strengthen your own church by being involved in this sort of work.
Tanya, I'll give you the final word. What advice would you give to individuals or churches?
Well, I will just piggyback on what Jay said. While it is often messy and awkward and challenging to get into the weeds of someone's brokenness, it is an absolute privilege. And so we welcome and we invite churches and the kingdom and to be a part of what God has already called us to do. It will change you. It will change your church. It will change the way you see others and even the way you see yourself. And so that's my encouragement to churches and invitation. So please contact any of us. And like Jay said, just jump in and God will lead you and direct you and guide you. And so thank you for having us.
Yeah. I want to thank the audience for joining us today. Bishop Blake, Tanya, Jay, thank you all so much for being part of this conversation, and most importantly, for the work that you do on behalf of children and families. Thank you for joining us here at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. Have a good day.